by the recommendation of our dearest Sanghi, Sky Guardian. He was watching this Bhagavad Gita lecture series by Vedant Acharya Yogananddas Swami, and thought it might be a good idea to once a week go through a video in this series, and we can watch it together. I can pause and add some commentary, maybe take some questions. Each video is about 20 to 30 minutes on average. It goes through this ancient scripture called the Shrimad Bhagavad Gita, which is a song, a Gita, sung, it is said, thousands of years ago on a battlefield by the divine. It's believed that from time to time in India and all throughout the world, the divine comes on earth. Just as the divine is within all things, sometimes that thing or person or place becomes a kind of receptive radio antenna to receive that divine truth that permeates this cosmos. And Krishna was one of those beings whom on the battlefield of Kurukshetra imparted wisdom about the truth of himself and by extension all selves to poor Arjuna on the brink of the biggest conflict ever, the Mahabharata. There are many different ways to interpret the Bhagavad Gita. I will not claim this or mine to be absolute. This interpretation comes from the BAPS, which is a spiritual tradition centered around a recent incarnation of the divine, known as Swaminarayan, whom is the center of the organization, which we're going to read from and listen from. Vedant Acharya Yogananddas Swami. It's a good name. Vedant Acharya means teacher of Vedanta. Vedanta means end of the Vedas. Anta means end of. Veda means truth, knowledge, specifically that which was revealed by Krishna, for example. Vedanta Acharya, teacher of the highest truths. You could translate that. And his Swami name is Yogananddas, which means the bliss of union. Yoga means union, Ananda means bliss, and Das means servant. So servant of the bliss of union is his Swami name. Swami is a Hindu monk. Without further ado, I'm going to turn down the background music and pull up this video for us to go through together. You don't have to have the complimentary book at home exactly. If you do have a Bhagavad Gita of any translation, that would probably be more helpful than not. But I happen to have the same version that the BAPS Swaminarayan Sampradaya uses, which is in my hands here. I assume we'll be starting with the first chapter. There's a picture of Krishna, and my blue screen perfectly cuts out his blue skin so he looks like space. That is indeed where the name Krishna comes from. Krishna means dark blue or black, not unlike the space that you see when you look up into the sky. There he is giving his song, his Gita, to Arjuna, who is very delightfully receiving this instruction in the chariot. This whole story has many layers to it. Probably a very high layer, I should tell you, is that there's some metaphorical things happening. Not to undermine the historicity that many devotees believe in also, 5,000 years ago or so. But that, in this context, Krishna is speaking on behalf of the Paramatma, the higher self. Arjuna represents the buddhi, the intellect. The chariot represents the body. The reins on the horses represent the manas, the mind, and the 5 horses that you can't see are the 5 jnanendriyas, the 5 senses, and the battlefield around them, and where the horses go are the vishayas, the experiences of the senses. That was a pretty hefty introduction. Lots of terms. Don't feel like you have to memorize any of that. Just wanted to wet your whistle. Allow me to bring up session 1 of the Shrimad Bhagavad Gita lecture series.
Sarvopanishado gavo dogda gopala nandanaha partho vatsa sudhir bhokta dugdam gitamrutam mahat. As we begin this Shrimad Bhagavad Gita lecture series together,
It's a little quiet on your end, isn't it? I don't think I can turn it up any higher, but what I can do is just turn off the background music so it's that much clearer. That's the other way. We'll just have to listen intently.
I want to thank you for joining me. We're going to start right away. It's 5,000 years ago. 10 days of the Mahabharata war have finished. And after that, in Hastinapur, one of Dhritarashtra's ministers, Sanjay, is making his way to Dhritarashtra's bedroom late at night. He reaches outside of the bedroom and there are 2 guards standing there. Sanjay tells them, I need to go and immediately meet Dhritarashtra. I have important information for him. The guards look at each other and they tell Sanjay that Dhritarashtra, because of the war, is suffering from insomnia. He's not able to sleep. And if you go and bring him any news right now, then his mind will get lost in that information. And so whatever sleep he's bound to get, he'll lose that as well.
So some context. The Swami is talking about Sanjay, who is an assistant secretary to the king Dhritarashtra, who is the leader of one side of the war. The Bhagavad Gita, as I said, takes place in a conflict. The greater conflict is called the Mahabharata. It's between 2 factions, 2 sides of the same family, actually. One side is the Kauravas, and that's the side that Sanjaya and his king, who is blind, Dhritarashtra, is on. Later on, I'm sure we'll introduce some of the Pandavas, whom are the other faction, the other family. The Pandavas represent dharma, righteousness. The Kauravas represent adharma, unrighteousness. They're the bad guys. Arjuna is on the side of the Pandavas, the good guys.
So do reconsider if you have to give him this news or not. Sanjay says, I have to give him this news. It's incredibly important. You must let me in. And while he's saying this, Dhritarashtra from inside of the room, he hears Sanjay's voice and he calls him in. Sanjay enters the room. And as soon as Sanjay enters the room, Dhritarashtra feels a change take over him. Sanjay is a pious soul, Punyatma. And Dhritarashtra is a sinner, Papatma. And just the presence of a pious soul near the sinner, he makes him feel something special on the inside. The way you don't need to be told when you're walking past a bakery. It's just the smell of the bakery. It hits you. It awakens something within you. In the same way, just being near a pious soul, it awakens something in Dhritarashtra. Dhritarashtra looks at Sanjay. He's blind, but in his general direction, he says, what are you here for? And Sanjay moves very close to Dhritarashtra's ear. so that nobody even outside can hear. And he whispers to him two words, Pitamaha Hataha. Pitamaha, Bhishma Pitamaha has passed away. And as soon as Dhritarashtra hears this, he's vexed. Impossible. What you're telling me is impossible. Bhishma Pita is unkillable. Bhishma Pita has a gift from the gods. When he was much younger, his name was Gangeya, and he took a vow of celibacy. And that vow of celibacy impressed the gods so much that the gods came onto earth, and they told Bhishma, they told Gangeya that your vow is so Bhishan, is so strong, that from this day forward your name is Bhishma. And our gift to you is that you can choose when you want to die. It's in your hands to choose the time and location of your own death. So Dhritarashtra tells this story again to Sanjay, and he says, you're telling me that Bhishma is dead? It's impossible. It is impossible for someone to kill Bhishma. So I want you to tell me, from the beginning, how all of this happened. Who was it that killed Bhishma? And then Sanjay says, it was Shikhandi. Shikhandi! Dhritarashtra, he's so angry, he said, Shikhandi is the one who killed Bhishma? How can a fox kill a lion? How can a pebble eradicate a mountain? Do you understand who Bhishma is? Bhishma is like 1,000 summer suns. Nobody can even stand in front of his light.
I should add that this is context to the greater story that the Bhagavad Gita takes place within, not central to the truths expounded in the Bhagavad Gita when we get there. So if you feel at any point this is a lot of information, many different Sanskrit names and people, don't worry. As soon as it becomes a dialogue between Arjuna and Krishna, all of this context becomes only relatively relevant to understand how they got there in the first place. But the truths stand up by themselves. The words that Krishna speaks will make immediate sense. So don't feel lost. Or do feel lost, you're allowed to. The greater story is the Mahabharata is 80,000 verses in Sanskrit prose. That is a very long story. In fact, it might be the longest story that has ever been written down. It's 10 times longer in textual length from the Iliad and the Odyssey, Homer's epics combined. 10 times large, and those are very big stories themselves. The Bhagavad Gita is about, 1% of that? Or 0.1%, it's only 700 verses, whatever the math works out to be there. So it's a very small subset. So if you ever get confused on how many buzzwords are being used to introduce this story, it's because there's like tens of thousands of verses that lead up to this point, and we have to summarize them very succinctly. But don't worry.
Bhishma is like a hurricane. Anyone who even passes by him will be pulled by him. Bhishma is like a flowing river. Even standing by his banks is at a risk. You're telling me that Shikhandi was able to stop Bhishma? Impossible. Where was everyone else? Where was Arjun? Where was Yudhishthir? Where was Bhim? Where was Nakul, Saldev, Karna, Yuyutsu? Where was everyone else? Where was my son Duryodhan? Where was Dushasan? What direction were they facing? Where did all of this take place? And one by one, Dhritarashtra is just spewing questions at Sanjay. Sanjay says, pause. Let me tell you what happened. 10 days ago, in the month of Magshar, this is all happening place. 10 days ago, in Kurukshetra, 18 Akshohini worth of soldiers gathered. 18 Akshohini is roughly 4.8 million soldiers. Sanjay says, Duryodhan organized his army. He had 11 Akshohini. And on the other side, Krishna Bhagwan organized the Pandav army. They had 7 Akshohini. They're outnumbered. Now, it's not just 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. It's not a gap of 4 Akshohini. 4 Akshohini is roughly the population of South Dakota. I've looked it up. So on one side is just the Pandavs and their army. On the other side is that many soldiers plus the population of South Dakota. And in the morning, before the day of the war, on Magshar Sud Dasham, Krishna Bhagwan tells Arjun, he says, we are tragically outnumbered. Now, if we want to improve our opportunity in war, if we want to improve our chances of winning, we need to get some divine intervention. So you and me, let's come up with a plan. Arjun folds his hands and he says, Krishna Bhagavan, you guide me. What divine intervention can we ask for at this time? Krishna Bhagavan looks at Arjun and he says, near our lake, called Brahma Sarovar, let's build a small temple to Katyayani Devi. We'll do a Chandi Pat. We'll sacrifice one of our soldiers from the army to get Mata onto our side. And Krishna Bhagavan, the day before the Mahabharata war started, took Arjun, made a sacrifice, and did a Chandi Pat. This is all written in the Mahabharata. Quite often, sometimes in this world, we have these prejudices in our mind that one God, one Dev, or one Devi is superior to the other. If we look in the scriptures, we'll see that they all behave equally with each other. Many years ago, Pramukh Swami Maharaj, in one of the BAPS mandirs, he installed all the different murtis of God. Ramchandra Bhagwan, Shankar Bhagwan, Krishna Bhagwan, and Bhagwan Swaminarayan. And so someone made a passing comment that when you shut the doors or you shut the curtain, won't all the gods argue amongst each other? Pramukh Swami Maharaj said, gods have no issue amongst each other. It's people like you on this earth that have very small minds that think gods have an argument amongst each other. People have arguments against each other, not gods. Krishna Bhagwan takes Arjun, and on Magshar Sud Dasham, the day before the Mahabharata war started, he did a Chandi Pat. Then, it's early in the morning. Sanjay tells Dhritarashtra, Magshar Sud Ekadashi, even before the sun rose, both armies arise. And they're saying one word, Yudhyatam, 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 get ready, get ready, get ready. Both armies, they gather all of their soldiers. The Kauravas are facing west, the Pandavas are facing east. And at that time, Yudhishthira looks towards Arjun and he says, how should we organize our army? We're outnumbered. What type of view rachana, what type of organization should we use for our army? And at that time, Arjun tells Yudhishthira that when we were studying the rules of war, I remember from one of our lessons that when you're outnumbered, you should make the front part of your army very sharp. So let's make a Vajra view in the shape of a lightning bolt. And at the very front, Suchi Mukam Anikam Syat. Our army should be very sharp. Who will we put at the front? Let's put Bhim. Because Bhim, with his mace, is such a strong fighter that if he had to fight against the ocean, he could drive the entire ocean, exhaust the ocean, but he wouldn't get exhausted. They agree internally. And then they stand for war. And right as they're standing, as the sun is rising, Arjun looks at the Kaurav army and he sees Bhishma Pita. In front of him is Bhishma Pita, who has long white hair, a long white beard. His crown, his headdress is made out of silver. His armor is made out of silver. His chariot is made out of silver. Everything is shining. And as the sun is rising, in front of the sun, Bhishma shines like the moon. That's how Vyasji has described the entire scenario, the environment. And while Arjun is watching this, a gust of wind comes from behind the Pandavas and towards the Kauravas. Now, as the wind is coming from behind the Pandavas, is gathering all the smell of the Pandavas. The Pandavas, many of them haven't bathed first thing in the morning. And there are all of these animals. And as the smell gets more and more rancid, it hits the first line of the Kauravas, and the first line of the Kaurav army starts to vomit. And now that smell of the vomit starts to get added to that already putrid smell, and the second line begins to vomit. Third line begins to vomit. Fourth line begins to vomit. And with that wind, there's a big cloud of dust that forms. And everyone starts to scatter amongst both armies as they try to get their armies back into a proper formation. At that time, Sanjay tells Dhritarashtra, Arjun, because of the wind and the dust cloud, his hair became loose, out of his headdress. As he was putting his hair back behind his eyes, he was tying it behind his head, he told Krishna Bhagwan, I want you to take my chariot between both armies. Before the war started, I saw where Bhishma was standing. I saw that next to Bhishma was Duryodhan. On the other side of Bhishma was Dushasan. I saw that next to Dushasan was Ashwathama. And next to Ashwathama were the other soldiers. But now, I'm worried that maybe they've moved some of the warriors around. I want to see them again. So take my chariot between both sides of between both armies. Sena yor ubayor madhye. Ratham stapaya mechuta. And when Sanjay tells this to Dhritarashtra, Dhritarashtra stops Sanjay. He says, stop. You've told me about some of the warriors and where they were standing. I want to know in full detail where everyone is. Where is Yuyutsu in this? And Sanjay says, I left Yuyutsu out on purpose. Yuyutsu is Dhritarashtra's oldest son. While Dhritarashtra and his wife while Gandhari was pregnant with Duryodhana, she was pregnant for 2 years. So Dhritarashtra, being the king, the de facto king at the time, was worried about his lineage. So he sired another son with his handmaiden named Sauvali. That son is actually the oldest of the Kauravas. That son's name is Yuyutsu. And for Dhritarashtra, Yuyutsu is his insurance policy. He's got 101 other children, 100 other boys, and one daughter named Dushala. These 101 children, he knows, are at risk because they have 2 bad parents. But Yuyutsu only has 1 bad parent, Dhritarashtra. Sauvali is a good mother. So for him, for Dhritarashtra, Yuyutsu is his insurance policy. Sanjay says that at the very beginning of the war, Yudhishthira, he gave an ultimatum. He said, this is my last opportunity that I'm giving to anyone on the Kaurav side. If you want to fight on the side of Dharma, then you have to come on this side. Because Dharma exists where Krishna is. And Krishna is on our side. Yuyutsu heard this and he understood that wherever there is Krishna, there is Dharma. And wherever there is Dharma, there is victory. So at the very beginning of the war, Yuyutsu switched sides. And when he hears that, Dhritarashtra says the word sadhu, sadhu, meaning good, good. He's actually satisfied that one of his children has a chance to survive. And then Dhritarashtra says, tell me everything. I want to know all the details about what happened in Kurukshetra. And now here, the shlok, the couplet that Dhritarashtra says, is the first shlok of the famous Shrimad Bhagavad Gita that we read today. Dhritarashtra tells Sanjay, Dharma kshetre Kurukshetre, samaveta yuyutsavaha, mamaka pandavascheva, kima kurvata Sanjaya. Sanjay, in Kurukshetra, what were my children and Pandu's children doing? How were they organized when they were preparing for war? Everything I said before this is background. In the Mahabharata, there are actually 31 chapters in the Bhishma Parva that are called the Gita Parva. In those 31 chapters, 18 chapters are considered the famous Shrimad Bhagavad Gita that we have today. And this couplet is the very first couplet, Dharma kshetre Kurukshetre. Dhritarashtra asks Sanjay what everyone is doing. And at that time, Sanjay, he again describes where all the soldiers are standing.
Is a beautiful pair of words that open up the first chapter of the Shrimad Bhagavad Gita. Dharma kshetre Kurukshetre. Dharma means righteousness or righteous duty. Kuru is the side of the Kauravas, the name of, that's the Sanskrit plural for Kurus, as Kauravas. Kuru is the singular. So on the field, kshetra means field. In the field of righteousness, the field of us, we, Sanjay is saying, there's already a subtle connotation that Sanjaya, the seer, or something that you should know, is that Sanjaya is not actually present on the battlefield. He is using a boon that he got to be able to relay what's happening on the battlefield. Kind of like FaceTime. Nowadays we have FaceTime. Sanjaya has spiritual FaceTime. He can see what's happening on the battlefield. The fact that he's saying the field of our family, also known as the field of righteousness, proves that Sanjaya is trying to affirm a king who is anxious about if they really are on the side of Dharma. There is that hesitation there. Dharma kshetre Kurukshetre. Our people in the field of righteousness. Unfortunately, they are not on the side of Dharma.
Where are the Pandavas, where are the Kauravas, and how they begin the war. And at that time, Sanjay reminds Dhritarashtra that after the wind blew, Arjun tells Krishna Bhagwan, Sena yor ubayor madhye ratham stapaya mechuta. Why? Why does he want his chariot to be taken between both armies? Ger maya saha yoddhavyam. Asmin rana samudyame. Who am I fighting against? I want to see my enemies. Now this is it. This is the first miracle of the Shrimad Bhagavad Gita. The first miracle is not in the 11th chapter when Krishna Bhagwan takes a full form, Vishwarup Darshan. No, the first miracle is that in the Shrimad Bhagavad Gita, God's Updesh, God's guidance, the first command isn't from God to devotee, it's actually from devotee to God. Arjun commands God, take my chariot between the two armies. Krishna Bhagwan does as he's told. And Krishna Bhagwan takes Arjun between the two armies and he says, look across and see your enemies. And when Arjun looks, he sees his family. He sees his grandfathers, he sees his uncles, his maternal uncles, he sees his cousins, his nephews, he sees his brothers. And all of a sudden, he is just lost. He goes into deep depression, distress. Krupaya paraya vishto. Arjun is overcome with grief. And in that grief, he looks to Krishna Bhagwan and he's unable to say anything to him while he's in the chariot. He gets out of the chariot, goes behind his own chariot, drops his bow, falls to his knees. Krishna Bhagwan is confused. What's happening here in front of all of these millions of people? Krishna Bhagwan gets out of the chariot, goes behind the chariot, and sees Arjun on his knees, cowering and sweating. And Arjun looks to him and he says, Bhagwan, Siddhanti mama gatrani, mukham cha parishushyti, vepatuscha sharire me roma harshascha jayate, gandivam sransate hastat, tvakcheva paridayate, nacha shaknomi avastatum, brahmativa cha me manaha. Bhagwan, my entire body is shaking. My skin is burning. My mind is just moving. I cannot stand still. My mouth is dry. My eyes are flickering. I can't hold my bow. Everything is going wrong. I don't know what's happening to me. And at this point, Krishna Bhagwan looks at him. And Krishna Bhagwan laughs. Prahasan Eva. Look at the situation here. Arjun is sweating. He is in fear, in complete conflict internally. A few years ago, there was an article in The Economist. And it was a very small article about the winters in North India. And at that time, that small article said that the winters in North India, especially that year, were so bad that roughly 50 people died because of the cold. Just the cold killed 50 people in North India that winter. This is 5,000 years ago. In the month of Makshar, in the winter, in Kurukshetra, in North India, in the type of cold that kills people, Arjun is sweating. Imagine how bad it must be burning inside for this to be happening. And while he's crying, Krishna Bhagwan laughs. Prahasan Eva. When you can go in front of him, cry your eyes out, and he looks at you and can laugh. When his Shobtu Somya Mukharvind Hasatu Hoy, then you know you've picked the right Keshav. And the reason for this is their response will help you get out of your response. Imagine if you're sick and you go to the doctor and you tell the doctor, my throat's been sore for a few days. I've been having this fever. What do you think's wrong with me? And the doctor looks at you and says, oh man, I don't know. But there are a lot of bad things going around right now. And I've heard these qualities and these different symptoms from other people. And you having them, I'm worried. And quite a few people have passed away from similar symptoms just recently. Now you might just have a regular cold. But hearing that other people may have passed away from having similar symptoms, all of a sudden your disease doubles. But if you go to the doctor and you tell him the same thing and your doctor laughs, Prahasan, he laughs and he says, don't worry about it. These types of symptoms are common for so many different things. It could be nothing serious at all. We'll do a few simple tests and I have confidence that you'll be okay by the end of this meeting. Then half of our disease goes away in just that consolence. The response we get in our worst times can help alleviate it or help increase that situation. Picking the right guru to help alleviate our pains. This is what Arjun's grief is going to teach us. Arjun then, one by one, lays out dozens of different arguments about why he doesn't want to fight the war. None of those arguments are good. But he lays them out, and one by one, Krishna Bhagwan listens. He lets Arjun finish all of his reasons before Bhagwan speaks. There is no Shrimad Bhagavad Gita in the first chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. It's all Arjun Gita. It's all Arjun giving his guidance and his reasoning to Krishna Bhagwan. From the first chapter of the Shrimad Bhagavad Gita, we understand one thing, that Arjun had a conflict in his life. That conflict led to depression, led to despair. In Sanskrit, that despair is called Viśād. But he didn't stay in that Viśād. He didn't try to solve that Viśād on his own. He sought help from the right person. He sought help from Guru and from God. And by connecting his Viśād to God, he turned that Viśād into Viśād-Yoga. The entire topic of the Bhagavad Gita, the whole scripture, is going to be yoga, a connection with God. Yoga is defined as a connection with God. When you take your depression, or your frustration, or your tension, or your stress, or any problem you have in your life, and you connect that problem to God, your Viśād becomes Viśād-Yoga. Don't worry about having Viśād. Viśād is not the problem. The problem that we have, the mistake we make, is that we connect it to the wrong person afterwards. Many of the great sages throughout Indian history, throughout Hindu Dharma, have had Viśād in their life, have had some sort of despair. For example, Vyasji, we'll talk about him later in the future, in one of the future lectures. But when he had despair in his life, he didn't try to solve it on his own. He went to the sage Narad, and he made his Viśād into Viśād-Yoga. And from that, we got the Shrimad Bhagavat.
Vyasji is the compiler of the scriptures in Hinduism, a very rich figure in terms of the mythology surrounding him. He is simply known as Veda Vyasa Ji, as an honorific Ji, meaning the compiler of knowledge, who incarnates lifetime after lifetime to take strands of wisdom in the form of mantras and put them in the right order to compile certain events that took place in times before the current age. So our dear Vedant Acharya is saying that even Veda Vyasji, the one who brought to us the scriptures that we're reading, even he had Viśād, had despondency.
When Narad himself had Viśād, he didn't try to solve it on his own. He went to the Guru Sanat Sujat. He turned his Viśād into Viśād-Yoga, and from that we get the Bhuma Vidya in the Chandogya Upanishad. The sage Valmiki, he also had despair in his life, but he didn't try to solve it on his own. He turned his Viśād into Viśād-Yoga. And from that we got the Valmiki Ramayana. Arjun has a problem in his life. He went to the right person. He connected his Viśād to God and turned his Viśād into Viśād-Yoga. And in the process, we get the entire Shrimad Bhagavad Gita. The first chapter of the Bhagavad Gita teaches us a very important lesson. For Arjun, God wasn't in his village. God wasn't far away in his house. God was right in front of him. Standing right in front of him was God. And here he was on his knees in tears. The moment will come in your life and in my life where God will be standing right in front of us and we will have nothing we can say to him except cry. And at that time, it's okay. Because if we take our pain, if we take our frustration, if we take our misery, our despair, our grief, every emotion that we have, and we connect it to God, then our Viśād can become Viśād-Yoga. At the end of the first chapter, Arjun lays out all of his reasons why he doesn't want to fight the war. Bhagwan does not respond. And in the second chapter, when Bhagwan does respond, he'll start to handle the disease, not the symptoms. Until then, I pray that whenever Viśād we have in our lives, and whenever we have Viśād in our lives, we can take that Viśād, connect it to God, turn our Viśād into Viśād-Yoga. For that, I pray. Astu.
So thank you for listening, everyone. That was the first episode in this series. Next week, we'll come back to do the second chapter, which is where it really properly begins. The first chapter is the context, linking the story to the greater story, the Bhagavad Gita to the Mahabharata. Krishna doesn't even speak in that first chapter. Sorry to disappoint you. but it's helpful to know in the second chapter, which I assume we're going into next time. We didn't really go into it verse by verse, although the Vedant Acharya certainly mentioned many verses, some not in a particular order, but definitely gave an excellent introduction on the basis of the first chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. So that's the story thus far, that two families fighting, and the reason that we get this story today is because the story was relayed from Sanjay, the divine seer and secretary to King Dhritarashtra, and eventually that was brought to us through oral tradition for thousands of years before we wrote it down finally. And contained within that vision is the divine song, which we'll really get into in the second chapter after Krishna responds to all of Arjuna's points about why he should still show up to his duty in spite of him speaking words of wisdom about lamenting, fighting at all. And we go into an understanding of the nature of the true self that cannot be killed, etc. I assume next time we'll go probably more verse by verse, especially when we get into the nice nitty-gritty details of the Vedanta. So thank you. This has been the first episode in our new segment on the Shrimad Bhagavad Gita lecture series. I hope it serves you well. Namaste.